Hello and welcome to episode 1 of the All You Can Board podcast. I'm Carlo.
And I am Dylan.
On today's episode, our main course will be our board game laws. What exactly do we mean by that? Well, you'll have to stick around to find out. If you're new to All You Can Board, whether that's this podcast or our YouTube channel, which we started in 2020, if you want to know a bit more about us, what you can expect from the podcast and how that differs from our YouTube channel, as well as how we each got into the hobby, feel free to go back and start with episode 0. It's a really short introductory episode we recorded, just as sort of an entry point for people who either don't know us yet, or maybe just don't know what to expect from a podcast that goes hand in hand with a YouTube channel. But before our main course today, as will typically be tradition going forward, we'll be kicking things off with a little appetizer. Dylan, why don't you tell our listeners what we mean by that?
Yeah, so the appetizer is essentially going to be an opportunity for whichever hosts on the episode, which will usually always be me and Carlo, but will sometimes include the third cousin, Braden, to each pick one topic that is completely separate from the main course. It can be pretty much whatever you want, as long as you can keep that discussion to, a couple minutes, a few minutes max. And it could be a game you're playing, it could be something about the hobby, about the industry, whatever the case may be, an opportunity to talk about that and have a little bit of discussion with the other hosts, separate from the main course.
Yep. So why don't you kick things off with our first appetizer here then, Dylan?
Okay, so I just got to say, the game that I need to talk about for this appetizer is a game called Dos Rios. Okay, and this is a game from 2004, and it's from Franz Benno de Long. And that, if for people who don't know, that designer is this designer of Fjords. Fjords is one of my favorite games. I love Fjords. I discovered that at a board game cafe here in Winnipeg, the original version, and then I was elated when I found out they were reprinting it, and I was able to get my own copy of it. This is one of his earlier games, not his very first game, but it's funny, I think in the rule book of this game, or on the back or something, it references this being his first big published design or whatever. But when I look it up on Board Game Geek, there are earlier ones. So I'm not exactly sure that this was his special child or whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, Franz Benno de Long has passed away, so we're not getting any more games by him. But I did see this in the used section of Victory Points, and I just need to tell you about it because I feel like when we play it, it's going to be an interesting. I'm going to be really curious to see if you like it, Carlo, and what you think of it. So I had a hard time even describing what the mechanic was in this game. When I looked it up on Board Game Geek, the mechanics are only listed as action points and modular setup. That's the only mechanics for it. So essentially what it is there's a modular board that is made up of these hexagon tiles that are 3 hexagons combined. So every tile is 3 hexagons combined. And you in the setup, put those into the board randomly, and that's going to make, and they sort of fit into the board like Civolution style, there's an outside of the board and then everything slots in the middle. And you then have to make the river flow, and the river's at the bottom of the board and they start at the top, and the rivers will always flow from high ground to low ground. And there's 3 different terrains. There's forest, there's plains, and there's hills. Hills are the highest, plains are the lowest. And so you naturally will form the river, and the river will start the game different for each game. And you all have these little campesinos, which is your little characters, and you each have 6. 3 of them start in the city at the bottom. The other 3 you'll place as part of the setup on the board. On your turn, you have 6 moves you can do across all your campesinos. Every single move from one area to the next is 1 move. You are trying to get to the tiles that have they're going to score for whatever the current harvest tile is showing. So there's these harvest tiles on the side, and they can show things like corn or like tobacco or like wheat. And then those tiles, if the river is hitting them, are going to give you 100 Rio for being on that tile. So you have to have a campesino on the tile. You have to have the river going through that tile, and it has to be scoring on the harvest. So the way that you're getting the river to change is you're able to acquire dams, and you will actually be able to place dams, and that will divert the river, and you'll have to take the actual cardboard tiles that make up the river, and you have to divert them they follow the laws of highest ground to lowest ground. And so you can constantly be changing the river to make it flow into the tiles that you have your workers that are going to score, and flow away from your opponent so that they aren't getting money. Because the way you win this game is you just have to build 5 buildings, and the buildings are their casas or your hacienda. And there's a way you can win early. You have to have 4 buildings instead of 5, but all 4 have to be along the river. If you're able to do that, you win early. Otherwise, as soon as you build your 5th, you automatically win the game. So basically, you're just rushing to get as much money as you can based on the river flowing through the tiles that are going to score, and then you're trying to build buildings. Buildings essentially can never be removed, and so they are permanent ways that a building that's on a spot that the river's flowing through will now always get you money if that thing is scoring as part of the harvest tiles, whereas your campesinos are moving constantly. You can, if you move into territory of another person's campesino, if you move from higher ground to lower ground, you kick them out and they get bumped all the way back down to the city at the start of the board, and then they have to kind of come back up. If you build your hacienda, you can spend 2 movement to go from the city directly to your hacienda, wherever it is on the board, so now you have this quick way to jump around the board. It's so fighty and kind of weird, and you're diverting the water like crazy, but your ways to divert the water get less and less. The river get less and less because you can only have a max of 3 dams on each tile, and so eventually it gets really hard to divert the rivers. There's 2 rivers and they can join, and so you can have it where the rivers join and then they form one river, and that can make certain tiles that come up that say normally this would just be the green river that scores or just the brown river that scores. Suddenly when they join, everything after that joining point, they all score. And so like I played it once and I'm like, this game's gonna take me like 5 times at least to play to really see how much I like it or don't like it. But at the very least, it's so interesting, and it just makes me like, I don't know, like it was a bittersweet feeling of like, I want to play more Friends Ben with the Longest Games, but like he's never making games anymore, which is just like devastating when you think about some, like when I think of now this and Fjord specifically and the stuff I like about them. It's not that he's doing anything like wildly different than other people have, but this river thing is just so cool. I've never seen anything quite like it, like that, in a game that I've played so far. And even as I was playing with my partner, even as we were playing, I would divert the river and it would make the river go away from every single thing that she was scoring in. And we both realized as it happened, we're like, this is just brilliant. Like, and then it made her not even want to focus on like building buildings. She wanted to focus on her turn, just trying to divert the river from mine because of the way that I impacted hers. Like, yeah, really, really interesting. Again, a very kind of obscure game. And I think it has like 1.4K reviews or something on Board Game Geek, but I've never heard this game talked about. I just happened to find it in the use section. So I'm excited to dive into this more. I'll probably feature it on an episode of games you haven't heard of on our YouTube channel eventually. And I will have more to say about it, but I'm just like super impressed. I just had to bring it up here.
Wow. Okay, so I know when you told me that you got this, I had never even heard of the game before. I'm also quite a big fan of Fjords and have wanted to play some other games by this designer. I have to say, just checking out the BGG page, looking at kind of like the artwork and stuff, this right away seems like something that is definitely up my alley. Released in 2004, which is like an era of board gaming that has like many of my favorite games. And I just want to ask you, so it's on BGG, it says it's best with 2. It says the complexity is 2.52, which is higher than I was expecting when I kind of like looked at the box and you told me about it, and the playtime says 70 minutes. Do you think those are all kind of accurate?
So 70 minutes was pretty much bang on. We played in just over an hour. I would definitely not want to play this with more than 3 personally, because the board doesn't scale in size, and I just think it wouldn't actually add any interest for this game. It would just make it so that by the time there would be so much change happening to the river and so much stuff happening that you could never properly like plan for your next turn. Whereas at 2, I knew that whatever my opponent did was going to directly impact what I did on my turn. I think that I'm only going to eventually want to play this at 2. But I am curious to try it at 3 and just see what it's like when you have this other player diverting the river and doing things. Like, I didn't even mention, like, out of the harvest deck, there's twice you're going to flip over a Desperado tile, and the Desperados start at the top of one of the rivers, and they eliminate the Campesinos. The first 3 Campesinos they come across, and they get bumped to the city. And so, like, it just, like, yeah, there's a bunch of really cool stuff happening in this game. But yeah, like, I would say I see why people say it's best at 2. Like, it feels like it should just be a 2-player game after one play, to be fair, but...
Okay, and going back to what you said about he's not making games anymore, just know that one of his most highly acclaimed games ever is considered to be Container, which has got that recent re-release on crowdfunding. So I have a copy of that pre-ordered through Dave at Victory Pints. So once that gets fulfilled, we will be able to try Container, and I think I have a feeling we're going to like that a lot. I also want to say real quick that it's interesting that Dos Rios. Is there any part of you that was attracted to this by the fact that we live in Winnipeg and our city is kind of known for the 2 rivers, the Red and the Assiniboine?
I didn't actually think of that until I had picked it up, and I was like laying out the game and seeing the two rivers coming together in a fork. And I'm like, oh, thematically, it kind of makes sense. But also, I just want to point out another one of his games I almost want to play the most out of the games I haven't played is Hellas. I've heard that one come up a few times, and for some reason, some people say, even though it's like not ranked as highly as Fjords and stuff, I think it might even be ranked lower than Dos Rios. Some people say it's one of his like strongest designs, and look, just when I've looked at the photos and stuff, I'm like intrigued by it, and it's a 2-player only game too, which is kind of neat.
Is this a different Hella? So this is a different Hellas than the Stefan Dora one? Because I have the Stefan Dora
yeah.
Hella. Okay.
Yeah, this one's from 2002. Yeah, it's Franz Ben de Long Hellas. Yeah, so I'm curious about that. I don't know how hard it'll be to track that one down, but
okay. Well, you track down that one, and I'll track down the 2016 Hellas from Stefan Dora because I've also heard amazing things about that one. But cool. All right, I'm excited to try. I'm excited to try Dos Rios. So here's the thing, Dylan. The one thing that's been really weighing on me and on my mind a lot in the past couple weeks in terms of gaming is that play of Fresh Fish that we had a couple weeks ago. For those of you who don't know, Fresh Fish is a game designed by Friedemann Friese, originally released in 1997, and it had a reprint in 2014, which is the version I have. So I played this for the first time a few years ago, and the first play, we actually played about half of the game slightly wrong, and then we realized and started over, and then we played it through the correct way, and I was kind of blown away by how interesting and how unique it was. Obviously, this was not with you the first time I played it. It was a couple of other friends, and I'd been meaning to get it back to the table, but the rule book is pretty atrocious, I would say, in this new version. The reason being that there's kind of like an old rule set and a new rule set, because the original game was so sort of kind of like obtuse and hard to wrap your head around. They kind of released this new edition and they presented the main rule book as like this new spin on the rules, which makes the game easier to kind of maintain and manage, but it loses some of the, I think, like interaction and some of the interesting decisions. So they kind of have a section at the back that says, if you want to play by the classic rules, here are the changes to the other rules. So if you're trying to play by the classic rules, you're going back and forth constantly between the main rule book and what are the changes, and so it makes it pretty hard to learn the rules. And I also think in general they weren't really laid out properly. The wording was kind of off. So I know we kind of tried to get through this together. So for those of you who don't know, it's a spatial bidding game where you have this map, and the idea of the game is there's 4 types of food trucks. There's fish, ice cream, cheese, and I think soda or whatever. And the idea is there's these 4 stands set up, and each player is going, or 4 food trucks, and each player throughout the game is going to be able to place a corresponding stand of each type. You're trying to basically fight for spots on the map where you can either place one of your stands, ideally as close to the corresponding food truck as possible, or you can place a flea market table, which doesn't do anything for you, but is sort of just affecting the kind of spatial geometry of the board, I guess you could say, and is kind of, it's mostly used to get in other people's way. And the goal of the game is to end with the fewest points possible, the lowest score. And that's because, let's say my fish truck is only 2 steps away, or my fish stand is only 2 steps away from the fish truck. That means that I have fresh fish. It only takes 2 steps to get there. If yours is, let's say, 9 steps away, then it takes 9 steps. So that you're going to score 9 points at the end of the game for that, and I'll score 2. So your final score is the sum of the distance between all of your stands to the corresponding trucks, minus the amount of money you have left over, and the money is what you use to bid to get those spaces. So that's kind of the basic idea. What broke our brains and what kind of has just had me sort of saddled with guilt ever since that play. I've been really struggling to shake this off. You know, I take game nights seriously. I know you do as well. And it's a game that I had considered having, you know, ready set up for people, like probably 5 or 10 separate game nights in the past. And I always kept going, no, now's not the time. I'm not quite ready yet. I read the rulebook a couple times. I felt like I totally had wrapped my head around it, was ready to show you guys. But this kind of expropriation thing from the classic rules where it's kind of, I won't get into it here. If anyone wants, there's threads on Board Game Geek you can read. You can try these things called these Nurikabe puzzles. That's spelled Nurikabe. There's a thread on Board Game Geek saying, hey, if you want to understand how this game works better, practice these puzzles. I tried a few. It actually helped. This was after I was sitting there feeling guilty. I was like, how can I ensure this doesn't happen again? Because the amount of times we had sat there going, does it work this way? And we kept realizing we did things wrong. We kind of just fumbled through this play, and I really want to put in the time to try and give this game another chance because I can see the brilliance. We played this at 5 players, and I will say that before they left, the other 3 before they left, they all told me, no, it's not your fault. Don't worry, it was the rule book. I totally want to play it again. It seems really interesting. And I also heard back from them after the game night about like, no, we should definitely, I want to play that again kind of thing. And I'm just going to say, Dylan, I didn't hear the same thing from you. And I'm a little skeptical that maybe you didn't feel the same about Fresh Fish as we did.
So here's the thing for me is like, I actually just think I'm a little harsher on the game. I'm with them. Like it has nothing to do with it. Doesn't matter who would have been teaching that game. I'm a little harsher on the fact that I just think that Fresh Fish has a problem with how obtuse its rules are, and the fact that people have to make threads to say go try out these games to be able to get better at understand the rules. I just don't think any board game should, as soon as you have to ask someone to do that, I think that you've failed the design of a board game. And that, I know that might be harsh for me to say, but I just think that like when I think about who I could be potentially playing a game, like say that was in my collection, who I'm going to be potentially introducing that to, whether I'm going to consider putting that out into game night, the fact that I have to remember that this game has this kind of set of obtuse rules, it's like I'd be wondering how many times do I have to play before it is completely second nature? Then what happens if someone else hasn't played it before and I have to try to explain that to them? Like, I just think that this has a bunch of really good ideas that maybe the best thing that he could do would be to take some of those ideas and rework them into a new design or a new version of Fresh Fish, even beyond, like, clearly they tried to do that here and they failed with this new version. But like I look at the original version on Board Game Geek and it says it's like a 3.04 complexity or something. And I just think that that's too complex for this type of game. When we're sitting down to play, I think that it needs to hit the sweet spot of like what they tried to do with the new version where it's like 2.4 or 2.5, whatever. And clearly they were even struggling figuring out how to get that across in a new version of the game. So I like for them to have that problem initially, then do a new version and still have that problem. I think there's a problem that exists in the design of this game that needs to be reworked. And that's not on us, obviously, as teachers of the game. It's more on the designer to say, okay, do I love this idea enough and do I believe in this enough that I need to just find a better way to communicate this to players? Because expecting us to like go do all this other research or to try to wrap our brains around something, me personally, I just think that you're starting to ask too much of someone to like do legwork before they play a game. So I see some of the brilliances there, but I don't think it's a brilliant game because of its inability to like get over its own obtuse rules, I guess is the way I'd word it. To me, a brilliant game is like when Knizia can find a way to like, or any designer really, can find a way to like bring something that should be obtuse or complicated or whatever and simplify it. And that's like something he hasn't done here. And I know he doesn't do that in a lot of his games. I've run into these problems with like Fancy Feathers and stuff like that. This just seems so far to be the most egregious. And this is, to me, it's like someone needs to sit him down and be like, listen, there's some brilliance here, but you haven't put it in a brilliant package yet and it needs more work.
I can see that needing to kind of like rein in his, like, he is kind of like the mad scientist of board games in some ways. Yeah. And I love how unique and innovative his games are. And just to be clear, I would not expect anyone else to be doing these puzzles and like spending time outside the game learning it. I think after doing those puzzles, I understood the way this kind of automatic rule works better. And I think it's on me next time to just make sure that I think I'm going to rewrite my own version of the rule book. And I'll just say, you know, whoever wants to give this another shot, I pledge to you right now that I will do a better job to facilitate this game and ensure that we give it a proper shot.
So do you believe in Fresh Fish this much that you're willing to like do this kind of like you're already doing this work and you're willing to like write your own rules? Like that's how much you believe in like there being a chance that everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, this game's amazing.
Absolutely. And the main reason is because of that play I had those few years ago when we kind of reset the board and played it over. That next play I was like, this is brilliant. And I understood it, but it was years ago and I have since forgotten, which led to this kind of failed play. So it was nice to have that amazing 6-player Challengers game as a nice palate cleanser. It helped me kind of, shake that off a little bit, but I'd be lying if I said...
Again, it had nothing to do with you. Like, I that's where I think, like, that's where I was being harder on the game is, like, I don't think it is on any rules teacher to try to could properly convey Fresh Fish to a group of people that have some that are playing it for the first time. Like, that seems like a tall order for anyone, which is my problem with the game. I just feel like you've created something where you're like, I'm setting you up to have a really tough time to teach a group of people my game. And I'm like, well, but you should be making it easy on me to teach your game, right? So,
yeah, no, totally makes sense. All right, well, now that we got something in our bellies, why don't we take a quick break to hear from our sponsors before we jump into our main course?
All You Can Board is proudly sponsored by Victory Pints, our local game store of choice here in Winnipeg, Canada. We strongly believe that Victory Pints is pretty much the gold standard of board game stores, and not just here in Winnipeg. Their main priority is having a wide selection of games, many of which you won't find anywhere else. They ship Canada-wide, $15 flat rate or free shipping for orders over $200, and they even take requests to try and order in specific games you're looking for. They also have a used games section where you can trade in games for in-store credit and maybe even find some hidden gems that others have traded in as well. Just note that the used games section is only available for in-person purchases and trades. Again, located in Winnipeg at the corner of Henderson and Hespeler, or you can check them out online at victorypints.ca. A massive thank you to Victory Pints for all their support over the years.
All right, we are back, and it is time for our main course, our board game laws. So what do we mean by board game laws? So these are things we each have come up with a minimum of 3 laws that were very personal to us. We haven't told each other about them in advance, and we are going to basically be presenting these as laws that are, strong beliefs we have about something in the industry. And you know what? I'll leave it at that. Why don't you just tell us, Dylan, how the kind of rules of this format are going to work and how we're going to talk about these laws?
Sure. Yeah. So each, like Carlos said, each of us is going to have 3. And after we have been given an opportunity to present our law and sort of the explanation behind it, the other person is going to get an opportunity to jump in with one of 3 responses. It's either going to be objection, they disagree, and then they'll explain why. It's going to be sustained, they agree, and they can give a quick explanation as to why, if they just say like I pretty much echo everything you said, they don't have to. And then the other one's going to be elaborate, and that's going to be that there's some aspect of it that they need more info before they can give a verdict. And so if the person asks for an elaboration, they have to give a bit of direction, say, elaborate, I need to know more about this or something. And then they'll give their full either objection or sustain. So we'll eventually end up with an objection or sustain, but the elaborate might be a sort of an interlude if someone needs a little bit more information.
Yep, that's. I'm excited. I need to hear your first law, Dylan. I don't know. Okay. I don't know if I'm ready for it, but
I mean, some of these with mine, I think only the last one might be something you're unaware of, but I think the explanations will be interesting. So I'm going to call my first one. I'm going to dig into some of it more, but I just want to give a little bit of a catchy thing at the start. And I'm going to say that mine is called "The Teach is Sacred." Okay, and that is the teach of board game rules. So like when you're sitting down. So I picked something to do with the teach because
sustained, by the way.
Well, hang on. What if I say something crazy here and you're like,
oh, so I thought that was your opening statement. Okay, well, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, you might be right, but then give me another after I'm done. Let me know because there's aspects I'm going to get into here that I wonder if you're going to be like, I sustain part of that, but I object to others or something.
Okay, I retract my sustaining, and I will I will let you continue before I comment.
So what I mean by this is, I think that every board game night, every board game we're going to play, like, unless you've played the game before, eventually at one point it started with a teach. And the teach is like an important thing to make sure everyone's on the same page, to make sure everyone's going to have a good time, to make sure everyone understands what's going on. And so I usually subscribe lately in my head. I don't like this. I've never said this externally until now, but some of the things I subscribe to when it comes to rules teaches is, for instance, if Carlo's teaching us a game on a game night, and I will try my best. Sometimes I forget or sometimes I fail, but to not ask questions, especially if they are potentially going to be answered by something that is going to be coming up later in the teach. Like the only time I will do that is if, like, say Carlo forgot to say like how you win the game, and I'm like, okay, for me to understand this better, can you just let me know how you win? And you're like, oh yeah, it's whoever has the most points, or it's whoever builds this first or something. But I don't want to be saying to Carlo as he's saying, yeah, so we all have 3 workers. And I'm like, okay, but what does a worker do? Like, because like he will like, ideally he will be getting to that, and I'm making him jump out of order. And if he jumps out of order, it might throw off his rhythm, or they might just make the teach take longer. And so that's something I used to jump in more often. And I'm trying to like kind of just keep a mental note now of the things that, like, okay, I do need to know this, but I'll just ask if he doesn't bring it up or something like that. So when I say teach is sacred, it's kind of like those rules. But the one I wanted to get into specifically is a part of me when I teach board games that I subscribe to, that I don't know if other people do, is if I'm teaching a game that anyone at the table, it's their first time playing that, well, clearly if I'm teaching the game, like, unless we're going over it, if it's their first time playing, I don't like to teach nuances specific or fringe cases or anything to do with strategy, really. And the reason I do this is because I really kind of think that the first play needs to be loose. First board game plays are for discovery, and that's almost what I called this: is first plays are for discovery. Even if we're going to like get into the strategy, even if we understand it better off the start, and we are going to really, really compete, it's rare that I play a first play of something and try to really focus on winning. And that's because it's so hard to know if I'm playing optimally. It's so hard to know what that means. I'm also someone who doesn't usually want to play optimally anyways until I'm like really into a game, like Castles of Burgundy for me now or something. And so I find that like if I'm teaching something, say there's a rule that says, this is the rule, you can always go into this spot, but it says, however, there's an opportunity where you might not be able to go to the spot if your opponent has done this or whatever. I won't even mention that. I won't even bring it up. It doesn't matter if it's in the rule book, doesn't matter, because that to me, that is something that is I consider in my head a fringe case where if that comes up in the game and someone's going to do something, they're thinking, oh, but can someone do this? They'll ask it in that moment, and then they'll have a better understanding of the game when they ask it, rather than me teaching a fringe case at a point when they haven't even played a first turn of the game. I find that that's harder for people to grasp. And so I will wait to teach certain things. And it means that sometimes I forget about certain rules. It means sometimes there are fringe cases that people do need to know, but then they ask me later in the game. So like I'm creating an ecosystem that maybe means people can't plan as much in their first play. But in my experience, it's meant that people have an easier time just starting, and then those questions kind of organically usually come up, and I'm fine with a first play going that way. And then if it's like a second or third play, then I'll like usually ask, like try to clarify certain things or make sure people understand. But that's where I said like you might have sustained the sacred thing, but I don't know whether you'd fully align with me, Carlo, on whether or not you want to like lay out more before you get into a game versus like some of it coming up as you're playing.
No, I honestly I think I agree even more than the original time I said sustained, with the caveat that I will say it depends who is at the table, because there are a couple people who I play games with who want a bit more, like ask a lot of the hypothetical questions, want to know a lot more, and I struggle sometimes to strike that balance where some people are like, oh, I think I'm ready to get started, and then someone else is like, well, what about this or what about this? And I've had games sometimes where I think, oh, let's just get into it, and then sometimes halfway in or 3/4 in, someone goes, oh, I was planning on I didn't understand that, I wish I had known that. And I kind of feel like they're indirectly saying like, why didn't you tell me that? So not in terms of strategy, but just like I'm always sort of anticipating what might this one player be upset with me about, or not upset, but like disappointed in, or feel like they didn't get what they wanted out of this play if I didn't cover this. So it's really tough, honestly, and that's why, like, you're one of the best game teachers I know, and you're also one of the most respectful people at the table in terms of listening to other people. So I agree with this aspect of the teach is sacred, and I love that this is your first board game law.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I wasn't, yeah, the nuance thing I wasn't sure, because that I know, and I was thinking that in my head too. I know that we play games with a few different people who do want some of those clarifications or will ask for those things themselves. And I guess the way I've decided, and I've noticed those moments too, and it happens with almost every game I teach, I feel like, where someone at some point is like, oh, I didn't realize that. And but I found that usually when that comes up, like I would actually say like 7 to 8 times out of 10, it's not that I forgot to teach something. It's that there was so much info at the start that it was just forgotten. It's like, oh, I forgot about that case where if you have 2 of these, you can trade them in. And it's like, because I know those are going to come up in a first play now, I just assume they are. And that's why I almost try to encourage it being like it's okay. We'll do a mulligan if we can, or just like, don't worry if you lose this first time, like because of something like that. Like we will all forget little things. I played games where I forget I have an ability for like the first like 4 turns. I'm like, oh my god, like I could have got like 10 more resources. I'd be way more ahead in this game or whatever. And I've just learned to just sort of let those things happen if it means that we start playing quicker, because there's people I know that I lose before the game even starts if I teach too long. And even if I feel like it's necessary that I teach too long, there's some people who just want to learn while they play. And so like that's how I strike my balance, is like teach as much as I feel like I need to, and let's just start playing, and the first couple of rounds will kind of still be part of the teach, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think everyone at the table sort of has to be under this understanding that we all have to lower our expectations for, like, is the the person who made the most skilled play going to win, and all that kind of stuff in the first play is just like really the element of discovery, like you said, should be the most important. And you and I are both the type of people who don't really look at like strategy forums for games. We're not like going there trying to get better immediately. I like to discover that strategy myself over time, even with something like Agricola. Like, I avoid a lot of those strategy threads because I've seen the enjoyment of just sort of improving naturally at the game over time. So yeah, I love this, and I love that you picked something specifically about the teach, because it's one of the most thankless parts of the hobby a lot of the time, and people who don't teach games as often sometimes don't realize how difficult it is, or the pressure that the teacher puts on themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's my first board game law.
All right. So I'm going to hit you with mine here, and I'm going to give you the first statement, and you can react, or you can wait if you prefer. I will elaborate, of course.
But you know what? Now on the fly, we should do it this way. Where like you do the statement, and then at the end you say, after you've heard the explanation, whether you've changed your. I love that. Like, because who knows? I could learn more and be like, actually, no, I object now.
Exactly. I'll lure you in and get you to agree, and then whammy, when you least expect it. No, okay. So my first board game law is: the heavier the game, and I don't mean the physical weight, I'll elaborate on heavier after, you know what I mean, but the heavier the game, the higher the standard should be.
The heavier the game, the higher the standard should be. I'm going to have to leave it at elaborate for now, because I feel like standard, I don't know exactly what you mean. I would say I'm leaning more to object, but I don't know what you mean by standard. Once I know, I'll leave it as elaborate for now and say that's where I need the elaboration, but I'm sure you're going to explain it, so.
Okay, so first off, just to clarify, when I say heavier, I'm referring primarily to the amount of rules and the amount of like time it takes to teach the game, but you can also throw things in here like the setup time, the actual length of the play time, the takedown, basically the kind of overall demand that the game puts on you in terms of like the mental load for you, to the people you're teaching the game to, how often do you have to check the rules or remind yourself of the rules while playing. How often are you spending thinking about the rules and obeying the rules versus the amount of time your brain is actually making decisions about the game? And so I'm going to propose that the analogy that comes to mind is it's kind of like a friend saying, hey, I want you to hang out with me more and hang out with your other friends less in order to make time for me. Basically, play these other games less in your collection that you already love, perhaps, or don't explore other games as much, but instead, hang out with me more, and also don't go too long without seeing me. Otherwise, you're going to forget important details about me and my life, and we'll kind of lose touch and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of how it feels to me with heavy games these days. And I guess another way I'll put it is I have a lot more patience and tolerance for playing, a 7 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 or even 5 out of 10 quality, like short filler game, versus if it's going to be a game that, let's say, takes like over 2 hours or, 2.5, 3 hours plus, and takes, 15, 20 minutes of setup and 20 to 30 minutes to explain the rules and all of that, for me, then it's like, this game better be an 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, because I don't want to spend hours playing a game that I find decent to play it just once, because then I feel like, did I really get enough out of it? Half of my time spent on this was kind of like the learning experience, or kind of like grinding through the rules. And the only way to know if I'm going to like it more is now I have to play it potentially 2, 3, 4 more times. By that point, what? Have I invested 10 to 15 hours into this game just to eventually realize that I don't really love it? And so that's why I just mean the standard should be higher. If a designer is going to design this massive game and basically say, yeah, I expect you to stop playing your other games as much to make time for this, then this better be one of the best games I've played.
Okay, so I would say I actually object. And it's only because,
spicy.
Yeah. Because like I understand and I see what you're saying, but for me, I think I view like I when I am like thinking about collecting my thoughts for a heavy game, I'm not, the time it takes to set up, the time it takes to play and all that is something I might factor into like my thoughts in my end thoughts in the review, but I'm never changing the standard of the game or thinking that it has like a higher hill to climb or a lower starting point or whatever the case, whatever the analogy you want to make because of that. I haven't quite like, I haven't quite made that distinction with heavy games in the same way that you have when we've had these discussions to do with like having, like, I know you've said before, like the idea of setting up like a 3 hour game to play, you will sometimes view it as like, yeah, but what are the 4 amazing 30-minute games that we could play instead? And why would I play this one 3 hour game if it meant playing 4 amazing games? It, like, again, in theory, that makes sense to me, but I really, really like heavy games, and I don't play them nearly as much as I want to these days. And there's some on my shelf that I still haven't played that I really want to. Some I haven't bought because I know I have to go through the ones on my shelf. And so I like don't change the starting point or the standard or whatever for a heavy game. It's just like something like, say, for instance, like Civolution, like I'll mention like you need to be okay with this setup. But when I started to review Civolution and get into it, I didn't like start it at a different point because of that, I would say.
Okay, so let me ask you. So games that we love, that like we talk about how, Keyflower, despite it being your number one game, sometimes we only play it like once a year, or Castles of Burgundy, which has been one of your like I haven't played that in person with you in maybe like 7 years, or even games like Santorini, Patrick, these short games. We often say, oh, we need to play these more, and my thought is, well, if we played fewer of these heavy games, we'd have time to play these games we love more. Does that thought fact, like, do you think of that and go, maybe you're right, or is it like, that's too bad? Not too bad, but are you saying like, I get it, but I still like the value of trying a new heavy game trumps that, or whatnot? Like think of a game that we played in the past, like something like Bitoku that we maybe played once, or Carnegie that we tried playing once or twice or a few times, and then we never went back to it. Like, are you happy if you could go back and do it again? Would you still choose to spend your time that way, or would you think of it as like, I kind of wish we had played these other games instead?
I think like with having hindsight, like, sure, there are games like Carnegie, I think of, or like you mentioned, Bitoku for sure is a good example where like in hindsight, if I look back, I'm like, yeah, like now knowing that it's not going to land for me as much as it did for other people, or one that I want to come back to multiple times. Like if I had spent that time on this other game, or just playing Keyflower more because we don't play it enough, then for sure I would have, like, it's not a regret, but I would have rather have diverted that time to one of those. But I would still like, there's still so many heavy games that I might eventually find out I don't want to play again or don't like, that I still want to learn and play, and I don't view it as like, what is that taking away? Even though it is taking time away from learning smaller games and playing other smaller games and playing heavy games that we already know the rules to, it's like, I just view it as like part of my journey through the hobby that I just have to be okay with and expect. Like Bitoku is a game that I don't want to go back to, but in playing those games, I learn more about what I don't like, what I do like, and then it might prevent me from playing a game or even trying it in the future, because I'm like, I'm pretty confident this is not going to be for me based on my experience with the other ones. So there's still like value in having experienced those games, even if I spent like 3 hours in a game I didn't like, which rarely happens. That like I leave and I'm like, I hated that game. But like, let's say for instance, you teach me a 3 hour game and my end result is I really don't like that game. Like I'm not looking at that like, oh, like that was a loss of like 3 hours, or like I'm regretting it, or I'm wishing I played something else instead. So yeah, that's where the standard thing's a little different for me. That might change over time, but like as of right now, I still have this like hunger to play heavy games so much, and like that's why I like game like Uwe Rosenberg. That's why I think he's one of my favorite designers. Is there's still so many Uwe games that like you're still teaching me. Like you taught me Le Havre in the last couple of years. You taught me Fields of Arles in the last year, and those are heavy games that take a while. And even if I didn't ultimately like them, like Le Havre, I didn't actually like. Didn't super land for me after that first play, but like that was like it's still an enjoyable experience, having learned a heavy game that I don't necessarily want to go back to.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think I probably agreed with you more when I felt like my primary goal in the hobby was discovering games more, and I just feel like there's been this shift, and maybe it has to do with becoming a parent and having less time for games and stuff, but I feel lately I'm more like, there's all these games I've discovered in the past few years that I've only played once or twice that I'm eager to get back to the table, and I guess that's why it feels like the heavy games are kind of getting in the way. So do you object officially?
I officially object, yeah.
Okay. All right. And this could be, I've thought about doing a video on our YouTube channel about this, and I think we could talk about this a lot, so maybe we'll collaborate on something in the future on this topic. All right, let's hear your next board game law here.
All right, my next one I'm going to call, and I'll give you the opportunity to give your initial and then your thought after. So I will call this one, fun is always more important than winning in board games.
Elaborate.
Okay. I thought it might be that for two. Okay, so I'm going to use an example really quick to kind of frame this, and this is a outside of board gaming example. I was going to say there's a game called Mario Kart. People know Mario Kart. Where one of the versions recently, when people were playing online, they learned that there was this method called like snaking or whatever, which is essentially like wasn't necessarily maybe intended, but it's this method you could do with boosts and stuff. And you could like, if you weren't snaking when you wanted to play competitively, you were going to be like blown away by the people that were, but it was sort of like something that you almost like tie into like min-maxing or whatever, or like getting really good at certain board games or systems or whatever, where it's like once you learn that that's the optimal way to do something, to compete and not use the optimal way gets really difficult. It just makes it harder for you to win. And I will just say that the reason I came up with this in the first place is like I am someone who's usually like really against min-maxing, and not because I'm not against it as in like I don't think you should do it or someone else should do it, but for myself, because it always ends up with me enjoying whatever the thing is less. As soon as I look into it, or as soon as I start like going into leaderboards, as soon as I start competing, I would say the only exception so far in board games has been Lost Cities when I played online. But even like Castles of Burgundy, I've been playing recently online, and the more I get my ass kicked online on their arena mode and realize the reasons why, the more I realize if I start trying to get better at it, the less I'm going to like Castles of Burgundy, is because I just don't like the idea of discovering that, oh, here's the optimal opening play, here's the optimal strategy, here's what you got to go for. Here, as soon as I learn those things, the freedom starts to be pulled away from me. The options start to be pulled away from me if I start to view it as I want to win this game. Because as soon as I know about that, if I want to win Castles of Burgundy and a certain tile comes up, and I know optimally that's one of the best tiles in the game, if I don't grab that, technically I'm making it harder on myself. And so, but if everyone knows that and everyone tries to grab that tile, it becomes a race of, okay, well, we know that tile has come out, who's going to grab it first? And while that is like inherently part of the game, something about that just like waters it down. It makes it a little bit less interesting for me. And so I find that I am often trying not to like figure out in a board game what is optimal. And that does lead to me losing more games or not competing as much in certain games. And it's not always the case. Again, like I use Lost Cities as an example. I'm sure there are other instances. It's very rare for me to like really get into it. I think that's part of why even like a game like Carcassonne, which we've been talking about recently, Carlo, because I've started to play that, is like I haven't figured out like what is optimal in Carcassonne yet, but I have started to figure out like what people do to block certain things or prevent you. And like I'm okay with a lot of it, but there are ones where the more I do it, the more I'm like, but does that mean that every time Carlo plays a tile like this, I should be doing this? And is it really then on Carlo to recognize that we're both at that skill level and say he's not going to make that play because he'll know Dylan is going to respond with this action? But as soon as I start going down that rabbit hole, I end up going down this thing where I'm like 5 turns ahead, being like, okay, but if I do that, then Carlo's going to do that, then I'm going to do this. And then it just isn't fun for me anymore. I'm basically like optimizing our gameplay, and I'm winning if you don't do an optimal play, and you're winning if I don't do an optimal play, is what it starts to feel like. And so when I say fun is more important, just to come back to it, it really just comes down to like, I kind of think optimization kills games, not board games only, video games, any games. I just think optimizing them kills it for me. As soon as you have to be the best at one area, and maybe this says more about me as a person, where like I just don't value someone being the best. I value more someone using a unique strategy and winning off of it, and me being like, wow, like here's the other last example I'll give. In Magic the Gathering, you get a meta, and a meta is based on the cards that are available. Here are the standard decks that people are building that have proven that they have the highest win rate. And so as soon as that meta comes out, as soon as it's widely accepted, you will look at the World Championships, you look at tournaments, and out of the top 8 players, it'll be like 6 of the top 8 players use this blue-red deck, or 5 of the top 8 players use this blue-black-green deck, because they are proven to be optimal. As soon as the game starts drifting to that direction, I have a trouble. But if you are a Magic the Gathering player who comes up with your own unique deck, goes to one of these tournaments and gets 4th or gets 6th, I think you are actually kind of the winner of the tournament, because you played the game as it's meant to be played. You found out your own deck. You figured out a way to actually compete, even if you didn't win, compared to other people who you will never be fully sure if they just went on the internet, found a deck, and learned how to play someone else's formula, right? And like, to me, that's what I mean by fun is more important, is that like as soon as you start to turn a game into how do I win, you're on a slippery slope to not enjoying that game. For me, that's how I feel.
Okay. Wow. There's a lot to unpack here. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with saying the first thing I'll say is, and I think you agree with this, this isn't probably like any sort of revelation, but the term fun is obviously very subjective. So
Yeah.
some people might find it fun to explore, and other people might find the competitive aspect fun. And so that I think is just going to be like from a person to person basis.
Sure. Fair.
I'm glad you brought up Magic because as soon as you were, I quickly typed up, I noted down here to talk about net decking and that concept of like, oh, well, all the pros are doing this and winning, so I'll go buy the same cards and build the same deck. It was what made me stop playing Hearthstone. I agree with totally. I don't like when games have like a guaranteed best strategy because to me that takes the fun out of it, and that's usually when I stop playing a game because, I think we've talked about this before. I think I do. In general, I think I am a little more competitive than you, and I do think I care more about getting better at games, but not getting better because I am like care more about winning. I think it's the getting better because that's what makes games a lot of the time exciting for me is it feels like I'm learning about the game and growing as a gamer, and just I don't know, that's part of the discovery process for me, and it's part of what made me love games like Agricola and Race for the Galaxy, which we talked about in our episode 0 obviously. So I think a lot of the time when there are these kind of like obvious best strategies and stuff, I think it's more a victim of like bad game design than anything. And this is part of the reason why I love challengers so much. I've played this like over 500 times on Board Game Arena, and you can't net deck. There's no way, because you're given random cards to pick from and you're just at the mercy of what's presented. And that's the exciting part, and that's somewhere where I go, yes, that is why challengers is brilliant, because they prioritized fun over like here's the best strategy, and once you figure it out, you've cracked the game and you can just win all the time. I will also say about Carcassonne, I don't think, like, I find Carcassonne is a game where the best move is not always obvious because of how much hangs in the balance until the end of the game. Whether it's the farm battles, like, is the biggest part, right? The big farm scores that happen at the end, but also the number of workers that you have. So sometimes, you could look at something and say, I could put this piece here and it's going to close off my city and it's going to get me 4 points, or I could put it here and I'll block Dylan, but there's no way, there's 20 tiles left in the game. I have 3 workers left, Dylan has 1 worker. There's no way to actually measure the impact of that decision. Also because there's random tile draw, you don't know, are they going to get their workers back? Like, how valuable is it to strand their worker? That kind of thing. I'm going to bring up another example, though, is chess. And chess is one that I have to agree with you here. Like, that's why I don't really play chess anymore. I loved it as a kid. It was fun to, like, get better at that and learn. And my brother is a little over 9 years older than me, a massive age gap, and he taught me chess. So like a lot of my life, whether it's been with stuff like chess or video games, I've had this kind of like David versus Goliath feeling. And so the journey of like getting better and taking down someone who is better than me at something is really rewarding, and is just and also when I played soccer growing up, I always played with an age group that was like a year older than me, just because it was the first team I joined, and I was kind of socially awkward and shy and didn't want to join another team, so I just always stayed playing with like older kids and stuff. So, but I agree that chess, like the learning the opening moves, kind of playing like a robot, to me that's boring. So, I'm going to ask you though. So obviously, Super Smash Brothers Melee is a game that we have played. We've probably logged thousands of hours in that. One of the video games we've played together the most. Yeah. And in Super Smash Brothers, I would much rather play a 1v1 no items match with you than to play a 4-player game with items. And for me, like most people would say, like, well, one is competitive as one is fun, but to me, I find the 1v1 no items matchup more fun because of what that turns the game into, and the level of competition between another player who's like a similar skill level. To me, even though that is technically more competitive, I find that more fun than the kind of wackiness of like someone gets this star suddenly and all this kind of stuff in the 4-player, which feels a bit more like a Mario Kart race.
Yeah, whereas like me, I'm like the middle ground where I want there to be items, but curated to certain items that have some randomness and some variability, but not like the hammer that automatically gives you KOs if you get it, kind of thing, right? Like something that you can utilize, but not something that will completely like just give you a victory because you happen to grab it, kind of thing. Because I again, like, and Smash Bros is a great example. Like, as soon as you get into the competitive scene of Smash Bros, it's like any 2D fighting game or Street Fighter or whatever. It becomes this thing of like, what someone's going to do if they're a good player because they're playing this character optimally. So it's just like, who can be more efficient with the button presses? And I get it. The skill level for some is fun. That is just not like, it's the reason why I was never made to be like playing competitive sports like that are like about an individual person, like badminton or whatever, long term and stuff, is because I have to like get as close to the ideal. Like ideally, you're never gonna be perfect, but you're trying to get as close to perfect in certain areas as you can, like to be able to like do the certain shot when someone does this or whatever, respond to someone. And like, I don't know, I never really like approach things that way. I guess mostly because it's also the reason why mean games and certain things like that, games like that, like are harder for me to grasp, because you have to not only get good at your own skills, you have to be good at countering someone else. And it's rare that I want to focus on countering someone else unless the game systems are really built around that, because I feel like then I'm supposed to be getting my enjoyment out of making someone else do worse in a game, which I get, like that's part of it, but I grapple with that. Like I find it hard where like I'd rather like each be doing our own things, and there's certain interactions where like I'm taking something away from you by doing this, but as soon as like you're building an awesome system and my response is destroy your system, I like, there are games like that I like, but it's rare. Like Innovation is the newest one that I've started to enjoy, that where it's like I can completely deconstruct what you're doing by doing something, but for some reason in that game it no longer bothers me as much. It's just like it's part of the game. Maybe it just takes me longer to embrace those things.
That's totally fair. And I'll say right now, I had a board game law that I was considering bringing up about the topic of mean games and meanness in games. And I thought, you know what, that's a whole discussion. That's going to be its own episode one day. So maybe we'll leave it at that. So just before I give my final verdict, can you just repeat the exact statement? Fun is
much more important than winning in board games.
If you had said fun is much more important than being competitive, I would have objected. But because you said more important than winning, I'm going to sustain and agree with you.
A hesitant sustain.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Oof, that's a tough one. We could go down that rabbit hole for a while, but I think we should move on to our next law here.
Agreed.
Okay, so my next law here is: the board game industry needs more developers and fewer designers.
More developers and fewer designers. I'm going to say elaborate.
Okay, so I had put in brackets not only more developers, but also to a lesser degree more like rules writers and editors. But I think the main one I want to focus on is the developers. So just for anyone who's unclear on the difference between these terms, a designer is the person who comes up with the initial idea for a game and presents it to a publishing company, or perhaps they run their own publishing company, whatever the case may be. And a developer is the person, or sometimes there's a development team. Sometimes this is someone who works for the publishing company as like a full-time employee, and they just are the developer for all the games that publisher releases. Or sometimes it's someone who like is brought on to help develop that particular project or whatnot. And so I basically what it comes down to for me is that I feel like there's a really high degree of oversaturation in board games these days. We talk about how there's like thousands of releases every year and we can never play them all. And how many games do we play where we go, that was good, but I don't need to play that again, and all this kind of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of, how many games have we talked about? I talk about this in my Curating My Collection series all the time. We talk about this when we're in our Dig In or Move On, where we say we're going to move on from a game even though it was pretty good. The fact that like so many games have good ideas, we go, oh, there's so many good ideas here, but it didn't quite come together properly. That's to me is like, if 30% of the people designing games were instead focusing on getting better at developing games, if the market had fewer games, but the average of quality of each game was higher, I think we would all be better off for it. And, maybe that would lean into more than instead like more playtesting and refining, rather than just like, here's an idea and we have to meet this target for our shareholders or whatever we have to release this many games per year to meet these financial targets to be sustainable. So we're going to release this game in 4 months, regardless of where it's at. Doesn't matter what the development process has been comprised of. This sounds like a cool idea. Let's publish it and we'll just see. Maybe one of our 4 releases makes it big this year. Whereas I'd rather see companies take their time, release 1 or 2 games per year and work more on the development side of things to polish games a little more. And the last thing I'll say just on this topic is that developers deserve a lot more credit, because we see on game boxes all the time, it's usually just the designer with the publisher's logo. Once in a while, you see the artists, right, are credited, but I can't even think of a single game where the developer is actually, I will say, I think there's a couple games by Pencil First Games, I want to say, has been good about crediting the developers on there. And you sometimes see it inside the rulebook, but a lot of the time the developers are kind of like the unsung heroes in board games. And I just think it's a shift that I'd like to see. So that's why I think the industry needs more developers and fewer designers.
Okay, I sustain that. That makes, not only does it make complete sense, I relate to the unsung part a little bit, because I went to school for video editing, and video editors are often called the unsung, because like people will say that the when editing is the best editing is what you don't notice, and so you're never singing their praises because you're not noticing the work they're doing. Because if you notice the work they're doing a bad job. And so sometimes, that's not always the case, but like I feel like as someone who sometimes is the unsung person in the edits I've done in the past for stuff, like I can resonate with wanting to like give them more credit, and also that we need more of those people that are doing that sort of behind the scenes or in the back end work that is sometimes more important, not always, but sometimes more important to certain game designs or certain games and what is lacking in them. So yeah, that makes complete sense. I think that's actually a really good one, and it's also highlighting, like you said, an area that doesn't get nearly as much credit.
Yeah, and I think the reason what almost spawned this and has made me think about this a lot over time relates to the A Song of Ice and Fire book series, also known as Game of Thrones. And even though I've sort of given up hope now, I know you made fun of me for a while, but holding out hope for that book number 6 and 7 to eventually be released. But honestly, if it wasn't for George R. R. Martin's editor, we might not have ever even gotten books 4 and 5. Right? His name is on. Do we even know the editor's name? No, nobody knows that editor's name. But by all accounts, she deserves a ton of credit for those books. And she's edited those down to about 1,000 pages. Imagine if those were 4,000 pages each. Like I imagine 100%. Those first drafts were probably, beasts. So anyway, that's it for that board game law.
That's a great one. I love that one. And I mean, like, also just in general, like I think we are so used to it just being designer and publisher that are credited. And I know it's always fighting for space on a board game cover and stuff, but whether it be on the back of the box, in whatever way, I feel like there are other roles in board games, whether it's artists, whether it's developers like this, that should be highlighted more. So I think that's great. Okay, my final board game law is a little unique one, because this is a board game law I am instituting for myself going forward. I've just started this law, fresh law. It just passed Congress, and that is: do not listen to recommended player count or reviews on Board Game Geek when you make a board game purchase.
Wow. I'm going to need you to elaborate. Sorry, first I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to ask you to elaborate. Are you saying before buying the game, or after you've bought it before
buying the game? Before buying the game. Before buying the game for the review, before playing it for the recommended player count.
Objection.
Okay. I thought you might. So I'm going to explain this a little bit. So I have found that what I've noticed being around Victory Pints a lot more lately is there are, and I also was one of these customers, the amount of people that come in and their routine is essentially like, look at a game on the shelf, pull it out, be interested in it, put it back, take out your phone, search it up in Board Game Geek, read about it, and then decide from there whether you're interested in it, is super, super common. That's just a really super common practice. I'm not saying that we should get rid of that completely in some cases, especially if you're buying for other people or you need to know more about the game. Some board game back covers are really bad. I totally get it. But there have been some people where it fully is influencing whether or not they are going to get a game. And I've done that before, where I'm like, oh, this looks really interesting. And I open it up on BGG. I'm like, 6.8. No, I'll spend my money elsewhere or whatever. And I will just say that for every single bad review of a board game or mediocre review of a board game, if you click into there is someone who gave that game a 10. There is someone who thinks it is an amazing, perfect game for them. And at the same time, for everyone that says this game is best at 2, there are percentages that say, no, it's best at 4. No, it's best at 3. And I think that you can take this from board games, you can apply it to anything. I think you are doing yourself a disservice if you just assume you are the majority. If you just assume, well, yeah, whatever the collective says, it must be where I'm going to land. Because who's to say you aren't the 10 out of 10 on that game? Who's to say you actually don't think that game is best at 2, even though everyone else says it's best at 4, and that's where you get your enjoyment. And if you never go in, if you never delve, or if you are encouraged not to by you never purchasing the game in the first place or gravitating away from a player count because of what it says, you might never discover that about yourself for that game, and you might miss out on a game that ends up being one of your favorites because for some reason that game is a 10 out of 10 for someone. And that to me is the most interesting thing, is that like we'll hear about a game, it's like, oh yeah, a lot of people didn't like that game, but there will always be someone that's like, really, I love that game. Like I just talked about, this is what made me think about, like I just talked about Mille Fiori being bad at 2, and there was someone who responded to the comment saying, I play exclusively at 2 and I really, really enjoy it. And like that to me was the most interesting comment we got, because even though I disagree, for them it is a 2-player game and it works for them as a 2-player game. And so what if that was going to be you? What if you went to the store and you picked up Libertalia, and you're like, that's a bad example because it says it's good, but you can even do that. Like you pick it up and you look and like, oh yeah, this is a good game, and you bring it home and you find out you don't like it. Like I just think that if you could stop, I know board games are expensive, and I know that like try to commit to a $70 game, even though people say it's bad, it might not always be feasible. But what if it's going to be your favorite game and you'll never know because you just listen to the collective? The collective is sometimes comprised, you can go into the best player count for certain games and it's like, oh, it says it's best of 2, but it's 31 people that have voted only that say it's best of 2, and there's like 2,000 reviews. Like isn't, I'm always saying super common, but like it is always such a low number that really, how do we know it just isn't that those 30 or those 100 people just happen to be the ones that are skewed that way, and all the people that think it's best of 4 just didn't log on to Board Game Geek to rate it, right? So I'm trying to like do this going forward, where I'm essentially just going to let myself be the final say, because there are I'm more and more, I won't get into it here, but more and more there's games I'm playing that I thought I didn't like, that it just took more plays, or games that other people didn't like that I'm liking, or vice versa. And so I just think it's an interesting law to kind of propose for yourself going forward.
Okay, so this is a complicated one for me. I'm going to say right now that I agree, I would say sustain 100% on the ratings and reviews aspect. And that being because, like exactly what you said, I think also a lot of older game, like the older you go back, even we were just talking about Dos Rios at the beginning of this episode, I think it was rated a 6.4. And people were, I think, a lot more strict with their ratings for games back in the day. And so games that came out 20, 30 years ago that are like a 6 point something or low 7, that's actually like a quite good. That would probably be more equivalent to like a 7.5 or 8 on Board Game Geek today. And yeah, I think going on just off of ratings is a bad idea. However, where I'm going to let my objection stand is going to be the player count one. And that is primarily because for every comment that you get, like you said, about someone saying like, oh, well, we play it with 2 and it's great, I think there was also a comment from someone who said, we played it once with 2 and we sold it immediately, but oh well, there's plenty of other games to play, kind of thing. And I just thought, like, I wonder if they would have played it with 3 or 4. And so it's not to say that you should immediately listen to someone and what they say and be like, well, because they said it's best, then I for sure don't want to. But it's a good sort of, I guess, a guiding factor that maybe can or should influence your purchasing decisions. And I'm going to throw out 2 game examples of games that have been released in the past few years where, like, so let's say Stationfall plays 1 to 9 players. If someone was looking for like a solo game or a 2-player game, would you recommend Stationfall, or would you say, you know what, this is probably better for a higher player count? Or something like Hot Streak, which I believe you can play with 2 players if I'm not mistaken. Whereas Hot Streak is another one, like if someone was like, oh my god, it plays with 2 players, like I'll play this with my partner at home, and maybe they'll have fun, but maybe that, maybe they'd prefer get more, value out of a different 2-player game, and maybe knowing that Hot Streak excels with a higher player count provides some value. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of in the middle where I sustain on the reviews but object to the player count. I
thought that's what I honestly thought was the player count thing could be the sticking point for you. But I also wanted to counter and say, but like, what about Arboretum, right? Like Arboretum, if we went with Board Game Geeks, you like, and again, I'm not saying you don't want to like dive into games and other player counts to discover for yourself, but like that is a great example of one that we completely differ than what the consensus is in terms of like what people enjoy it at or think it's best at. And I guess I started to ask myself that question more, is like, if I go with, at what point do I deviate to discover whether or not I am the outlier, or do I spend the time to do that, versus do I just go with the consensus because I don't want to spend time and find out, oh yeah, I agree with the consensus. And then it's like, why didn't I just go with them in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, it's a balance of trying to be like, do I dedicate more time to a game to see what I actually think of it, right? In terms of player count, I'm talking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, and Arboretum was definitely an eye-opener for me, seeing how much more I preferred it with 3 or 4 players. All right, my final one. Brace yourself, Dylan.
Okay.
I'm definitely there's no way you're going to just agree. I have a feeling this is either going to be an objection or an elaborate. So
okay.
And I know this is pretty bold, I guess. This is maybe my hottest take here, but cards are better than dice.
Ooh. I am going to object, but I'm going to say I'm not objecting as much as you probably thought I would, and this has only changed in the last year, but I'll let you take it.
Okay. So I know in general, I think I probably like dice games a little bit less than you. I think we've talked about before, like last time we did our top 50 games of all time, I think I had like only maybe 3 or 4 games at most in there that even had dice in the box.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by talking about the fact that I think even though there have been really creative ways to use dice, dice drafting, stuff like the scoring in Biblios where the dice modify. Knizia does this thing with dice all the time where there's no 6, like in Gang of Dice, it's 1 through 5, and then there's like the glasses. So there's, it could go on and on. There's tons of stuff out there that people do with dice. Obviously there's D12s, D20s. So I get that, but I think the degree of like creativity and variability that's possible with cards is just a lot higher, first of all. The second thing I'll say about them is it's one of the best tools for reducing rules overhead in a game, because you can teach, there are a lot of games where there's a basic set of rules and then there are other things that come up on the cards that don't need to be part of the regular rule set, where you can get started, something like Agricola, which I hate to come back to this all the time, but it is honestly the perfect example for this, where you can teach the basic rules of Agricola actually fairly quickly. Like within 5 to 10 minutes you can get someone up and running ready to play, and then you say, and now here is your hand of 14 cards, your 7 occupations and minor improvements, and suddenly it's like there's this like explosion of possibilities, and well, what does this card do, and how does this card come into play, and when does this happen? And if all this stuff was in the rule book, like the game would be so unwieldy. Like it would be that would be a game that I would say is in that heavy category where it's like if you had to teach what all the cards do in Agricola up front, that's nonsense. Like that's a ridiculous demand. But because of the fact that you can put all this rules overhead on the cards and they just let those come up, and as you're playing, you're already playing the game and you're kind of learning the rules and the possibilities as you go. I think it's just like one of the best tools to actually add depth to your games without really overblowing that kind of initial rules overhead. And the last thing I'll say is that cards can be public or secret without the use of like screens or shields and stuff like that, so you don't need additional components. The idea of having a secret hand of cards, whether it's like the intrigue cards in Dune Imperium or the hand of cards in like Battle Line or Arboretum, not only is hand management one of my favorite mechanics in all the board games, but the idea of like looking across the table, looking your opponent in the eye and being like, I have no idea what you're holding in there, like have you been holding this card all game? Like, it's just the possibilities created by it and the kind of player interaction or even just the mind games that happen from cards, I think are just incredible. And the fact that the cards can enter or leave the deck means that the odds change, whereas the odds with the dice always remain the same. You always know what the odds are of rolling a 2, for example, or whatever. So that's why I think, in general, cards are better than dice.
I will say, to be fair, I actually mostly would sustain. I agree that even just from the sole fact that cards, I think you said it, have either however you worded it, a higher ceiling or more possibilities, in the sense that there's more that cards can do, I think, than dice can do, in terms of you can put anything on a card and people are still coming up with interesting mechanics and ways to utilize them. That's just it's just cards, and yet look at this amazing game that comes out of it. But I will say that I don't think they're always better than dice, because there are games, and I'll use Castle of Burgundy again, that there is probably a way you could change the way the Castle of Burgundy plays to be used with cards, and you're revealing cards randomly, and that's what you're interacting with instead of rolling a die and having to manipulate it. But I actually think that when it just comes to not just rolling dice, but having to manipulate them, and each number applies to a different spot on the board, there's things that there are games that dice just do it better than cards would do in that game. So I don't think it's I couldn't sustain it for a blanket across the whole thing, but it would be like, I agree with you in that like 85% of the time, 80% of the time, cards will be better than dice, but that there is going to be this smaller subset where dice, I just like, in the same way that you say hand management's one of your favorites, one of my favorites is dice worker placement, when you have to like manipulate the value that's on them, and sometimes you're stuck in a situation where you're like, well, yes, I would have done this with a 1, but I have a 3, and now how do I get from a 3 to a 1 efficiently? Or if I can't, how do I like pivot? I like that decision even when I'm like wanting to punch my computer screen because I rolled 2 6s in Castle of Burgundy and I needed a 3, and I'm like, it's going to ruin my entire strategy. Like, I like having that unpredictability a little bit, but in general, I'm more and more, I just like, it's wild what people do with cards, and I can't say the same thing with dice. I think it's rare that someone does something with dice that I'm like, oh my God, that's so novel and new, versus playing a new card game being like, oh my God, like, yeah, that's amazing. Look what they did with the cards here. Look at how you splay them. Look at how you do this. Like, yeah, I think in general, I sustain.
Okay, so yeah, you know what? And I'm going to do myself a disservice here because I'm going to highlight real quick a couple games where the dice are just incredible and cards could not replicate it. The Voyages of Marco Polo, one of my favorite dice-based games, just incredible the way that you're using the values to take different actions and the way that... Anyways, I won't get too into the Voyages of Marco Polo. And Civolution, the way that kind of like the rolling the dice determines what actions you can take, which we've seen similar in like Castles of Burgundy. Like, I think that's brilliant, and cards would not do it the same way. And the last one I'll say is, even in Catan, obviously it's a game that is primarily where you're rolling dice, but there's actually a variant where it comes with a deck of cards that simulates the exact like variance of the dice rolls. Like, there's a certain number of cards that have value 2, 3, 4, whatever, all the way up to 12, and obviously there's more 7s and 6s and 8s. And if for people who say like, oh, well, I got unlucky, like I was on the spot that has 6s and 8s and it didn't roll, they say you can just shuffle up this deck of cards, and then you know that by the time you make it through the deck, you will have seen the exact odds the way they are. And to me, that kills the game. Like, that's boring. Yeah. Because then it also gets into people card counting and calculating everything, and, oh, well, I already knew this many 6s came out, so I can bank on that 2 coming out that hasn't come out yet. To me, that's where, like, no, you got to just stick with the dice. So it is a very general statement about cards being better, because it's not always the case.
And I think to even throw it back to something we were talking about earlier, like, I think that's when we're talking about like optimizing and like doing the best strategy. What I like about dice is it adds in this level of unpredictability that you have to, it doesn't completely always derail your plans, but it makes, you can't just be like, okay, well, this turn I'm going to do this, next turn I'll do this, and then I'll close off with doing this, because it's like, like if I don't roll what I need to, I have to find some other way to pivot, and I have to do that all the time when I play like a game like Castles of Burgundy, because you just, if you plan your plans, it's like that phrase that my dad used to always say, like, life's what happens when you're making other plans. It's like, that's how I feel when I play Castles of Burgundy. It's like, as soon as I plan, be like, okay, I'm going to play my boat this turn, and next turn I'm going to play this castle or whatever. It's like, I don't roll the dice, and it's like, I just rolled the worst possible roll, and now I have to figure out another way to do it. But the last thing I wanted to mention is, I do think there is one thing that dice are better than cards in on a more general level, and that's that I think that they're friendlier to beginners coming into a game. And I mean that in the sense that, like, everyone knows what a 6-sided die means. You roll it, you have a 1 in 6 chance. It's so easy to like inherently know that, versus a card. People are familiar with cards from like playing cards, but what's on it is so vastly different that there is something you can't just hand someone cards and be like, oh yeah, cards, I'm familiar with this. Whereas if you hand them dice, they're like, oh, 6-sided dice. You know what I mean? Like, there's just it's a little bit of an easier entry to a point for beginners.
Absolutely. And even just from a tactile point, like, it's much more fun to roll some dice than to just like put a card down on the table. And if we think about even when we played Lords of Vegas, like, letting that handful of dice tumble down the dice tower is much more satisfying than if you were just playing cards. It leads to these big moments where people are shouting around the table. So
unless it's the dice from My City Roll and Write, which Braden would tell you is the worst dice he's ever handled, or something like that. Maybe that's too much of an extreme. But he brought it up to me when we were playing games the other day, being like, yeah, those dice in My City Roll and Write, he really doesn't like them. So maybe not always better tactilely or tactically. Whatever. What's the other version of
we'll say in a tactile sense.
In a tactile sense. There you go.
Tactily, yeah.
Tactily.
So that's it for my board game laws. If you have a moment, I'm going to propose one collective law that I think we can agree on, and I don't think this will take a lot of time. But
yeah.
So this one I think we can both agree on is that Agricola is and will always... No, I'm just kidding. I won't go down that road comparing to a Feast for Odin.
As soon as you said Agricola, my blood pressure was like, here we go.
I know. That was a joke. But no, seriously,
Yeah.
my actual one here is that gatekeeping is the worst part of the hobby.
Yeah. Honestly, I would even go as far to say gatekeeping is the worst part of any hobby.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
It's just like the term, we always hear this term like non-gamers or people who don't, referring to people who still play games like Monopoly or Catan, whatever. Like, I don't know. I just don't like the idea of telling people that because you play a certain game or don't play certain games that you're like less of a game. Like, I understand the difference between like a casual or experienced gamer, that kind of thing. But not only non-gamers, but you hear a lot of people just refer, even though we tend to prefer games that have more player interaction, you often hear people in the board game industry say that like games with low or no player interaction are inherently worse. And I think that's just like, you can't tell someone, like, whether a game is good or bad is subjective. I can't tell you that you like a game, like that the game you like is worse than the game I like just because there's low player interaction. If someone I know doesn't like those competitive moments and they want to do, a puzzle style game where we're each building our own thing and then comparing our scores at the end, like, who am I to tell them that their game is not as good or that their enjoyment of that game is less, that there's less value in their enjoyment of the game compared to something with more player interaction. So I just think it's something that should not always be presented as more player interaction is better and less is worse. It's just like, let people play what they want. And if you want to say that you prefer more player interaction, as I do generally, then that's fine. But it shouldn't be a hard and fast rule. It just stinks of gatekeeping.
No, this is a great one. Honestly, this is like you opening a can of worms, and I'm going to try to only talk about one worm, just because like there's so much I could say here. But like, I just think that our hobby, when I mean board games, is so niche that as soon as you get into the idea of gatekeeping and keeping people out of it, I don't think people sometimes realize how much of detriment and disservice they're doing to our hobby and how much it actually affects it to keep people out of it. I'm not saying we need more people in the hobby for it to survive. That's not what I mean. But we do need more people in the hobby and consistent people in the hobby to keep it being as valuable and as great as it is. Like, I think that like if our hobby were to grow, there's a lot of benefits that can come from our hobby being more, and I don't want to say mainstream because I don't necessarily want it to be something where it's being taken over by a bunch of like corporations and how can we market this and stuff. But like, someone being into Wingspan and you say, oh, Wingspan or whatever, and making them feel bad for that, like that is a person who could have gotten into like 4 more other games and been around 4 more other tables and playing board games and then teaching it to their kids and all this stuff. And if they feel like it's a hobby where I have to be embarrassed that I'm into this one game, you've potentially kept a whole generation of people, like on the extreme, out of a hobby because you didn't agree with their pick, when really it's like at the end of the day, you not agreeing with them playing Wingspan says more about you than it actually does about them. Like for it to matter to you what game they play is something you need to reflect on and why that matters to you so much, rather than it is like anything about them just because they're into Wingspan. That's just using that as an example, but
yeah, well said. Well said. Yeah. And with that main course out of the way, I don't know about you, but I'm quite full.
Me too. Very full, even though I'm going to go have lunch right now.
All right, so this has been episode 1 of the All You Can Board podcast. If you'd like to chat with us and our lovely community about this episode, our YouTube channel, or anything else, whether it's board game related or otherwise, come join our Discord server. You can find the link in our show notes. If you're not aware, Discord is basically just a fancy chat room or forum which is separated into various topics, and it's 100% free. You can access this through your internet browser or download the app. Of course, there's no pressure or requirement to be active or even participate. We have plenty of users who prefer to just lurk quietly in the shadows. I do that in a variety of other Discord servers. Maybe you're an introvert like us. Maybe you just got into the hobby and you don't feel comfortable speaking up yet, and that's fine. Regardless of your level of involvement, we feel our Discord truly is one of the best places on the internet to engage this amazing hobby with a group of friendly, welcoming people, and there's absolutely no gatekeeping tolerated there, which we just spoke on. And maybe best of all about our Discord is there are tons of people there always looking to play games online together, usually on Board Game Arena. Again, you can find the link in the show notes. You can also find us on YouTube at youtube.com/allyoucanboard. We have hundreds of videos there and we'll be continuing to release weekly videos going forward. If you'd like to support the show, please consider leaving a review on your podcast platform of choice. As we're brand new to the podcasting world, reviews are probably the biggest way you can boost our visibility right now and help other folks like you discover our podcast. If you like what you're hearing, please consider recommending us to someone you know. Finally, if you're interested in supporting us financially so that we can continue to grow our channel and podcast and hopefully make this sustainable full time, consider checking out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/allyoucanboard. We won't get into the details here, especially because our Patreon will likely evolve over time, but we have a few different tiers available with various rewards. This is by no means an expectation from us, but of course, if it's something you'd like to do, just know that it helps us tremendously with covering the costs required to maintain a podcast, YouTube channel, various subscriptions, and all sorts of things that happen behind the scenes. And to all of our current Patreon supporters, a massive thank you. We've received an influx of supporters there recently, and we're extremely grateful and humbled by that, as well as all the support we've received over the years, even when we didn't have regular content being released. Otherwise, this has been episode 1 of the All You Can Board podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks for episode 2. Take care.
See you in episode 2.